60 battles fought, not a single loss. At 70 years old, Alexander Suvorov may have been the greatest commander alive. Then his own allies betrayed him, stranding 20,000 Russians in the Swiss Alps with no supplies, no maps, and 60,000 French closing in from every direction. What should have been an impossible death march through the Alps somehow became a legend. And it starts with a disgraced old man being dragged out of exile. To understand the scale of the disaster ahead, one must understand the man who was expected to solve it. This was not a young, ambitious general seeking glory in a new era of warfare. This was a battle-hardened field marshal who belonged to the rare company of world conquerors. While his contemporaries studied Napoleon, this old man was measured against Alexander the Great. His military record was an anomaly of history. Dozens of major engagements were fought across decades, and not a single defeat to his name. His philosophy of war was brutal, direct, and absolute. He did not believe in defensive maneuvering or cautious retreats. To his men, he drilled a simple, uncompromising doctrine: strike the enemy, sparing neither him nor yourself. Now, at an age when most commanders had long since retired to their estates, this legend was being asked to perform a miracle. But the Alps did not care about legends. The frozen, vertical wilderness ahead would test whether an undefeated career could survive a terrain where every trail was a potential grave. In the final decade of the 18th century, the French Revolution shattered the old European order. By 1798, French armies had swept through the Netherlands, annexed northern Italy, and seized Switzerland. To stop this expansion, Russia joined Britain and Austria in the Second Coalition. But in St. Petersburg, the newly crowned Tsar, Paul I, was obsessed with Prussian-style discipline. He demanded his forces adopt rigid drills, tight uniforms, and powdered wigs. Suvorov, a lifelong champion of speed and maneuver, openly mocked these reforms, declaring, "Powder is not gunpowder, curls are not cannons, a queue is not a sword, and I am not a German, but a Russian." This defiance cost him everything. In 1797, Paul exiled him to his remote estate at Konchanskoye. 2 years later, with French forces dominating Europe, the coalition needed the old commander back. Paul reinstated him. Suvorov was sent to Italy, where in the spring of 1799 he swept through the north, winning victories at Trebia and Novi. Napoleon was thousands of miles away in Egypt, unable to intervene. Suvorov had cleared Italy, but his ultimate trial was about to begin. Vienna did not view Suvorov's Italian victories as a triumph. They saw them as a geopolitical threat. Fearing growing Russian influence, the Austrian Hofkriegsrat devised a plan to redirect the undefeated Field Marshal north into the Swiss Alps. On paper, it was a coordinated coalition offensive to crush André Massena's French forces. In reality, the Austrian High Council sent them into a logistical void. They promised Suvorov ample pack animals, winter rations, and detailed topographical maps. Yet when the army arrived, only half of the animals materialized. The food depots were empty, and the maps depicted clear roads, where only impassable cliff edges existed. Then the strategic retreat of Austrian forces left a separate Russian detachment entirely exposed to a crushing French blow before Suvorov could link up. This left 20,000 Russians to march against 60,000 French troops. Even faced with these impossible numbers, Suvorov remained uncompromising, teaching his Cossacks to shout surrender in French as they prepared to scale the heights. On September 24, 1799, the Russian vanguard reached the base of the St. Gothard Pass. At over 2,000 meters, the peak was a wall of wet, freezing stone. French troops under Claude Lecourt held the high ground, firing from behind granite boulders and rolling heavy rocks down the narrow trails. The Russian uphill assault stalled. When some troops began to waver, the 68-year-old Suvorov walked to the front of the column. He lay down in a shallow trench and shouted to his men, "Bury me here. Wait until I am killed and bury me, then retreat." The soldiers turned back toward the slopes. A flanking party scrambled along the sheer cliffs, climbing above the French positions and forcing them to fall back. But a larger obstacle lay ahead at the Scholenen Gorge.
Here, the Devil's Bridge, a narrow stone arch, spanned a 30-meter drop over the roaring Rus River. The French held a dark, narrow tunnel on the far side, firing at anyone who approached the gap. Suvorov's men acted immediately. 200 volunteers scrambled down the wet cliffs to ford the freezing river below, threatening the French flank. At the broken edge of the bridge, soldiers dragged planks from a nearby wooden shed, lashing them together with the silk scarves of their officers. The makeshift bridge held. Russian infantry rushed across the single file of planks, leveling their bayonets and storming the tunnel. The French defense shattered, leaving the gateway to the Alps open.
A vertical dead end waited beyond the gorge. To advance, 20,000 Russians endured a 12-hour, 16-kilometer crawl along the precipices of Lake Lucerne, dragging mountain guns and pack mules in single file. Even after this grueling march, they fought through the dark to win a sudden night engagement. Yet their isolation was absolute. At a tense council of war, Suvorov confirmed they were betrayed. The Allied relief force was shattered. Austrian supply depots were empty, and food was gone. When advisors suggested capitulation, the old field marshal snapped, "Let the French surrender if they wish." In the rain and heavy fog of the Mototol Valley, André Masséna's pursuing French forces closed in. Suvorov staged a feigned retreat, drawing the enemy deep into the wet terrain. Suddenly, hidden Russian infantry burst from the vineyards in a bayonet charge. The counterstrike broke Masséna's lines, leaving 3,000 French dead and 1,200 captured. Reclaiming guns and seizing an enemy banner, Suvorov's forces withdrew in perfect order, turning a desperate trap into a tactical triumph. At the Panic's Ridge, the French army ceased to be the primary threat. At an elevation of over 2,600 meters, nature became the final enemy. The Russian soldiers marched into a blind landscape of waist-deep snow and freezing hailstorms. Men lost their footing on the sheer trails, slipping into the abyss below. To survive, the infantry abandoned all remaining artillery. In the freezing nights, soldiers broke their wooden Cossack pikes to build small campfires, boiling tea in the bitter cold. Through it all, Suvorov remained at the front. He refused a winter overcoat, descending the treacherous slopes on horseback while 2 Cossacks held him in the saddle. He coaxed, scolded, and joked with the freezing columns, keeping the men moving forward. The crossing cost the lives of up to 7,000 Russian soldiers. Yet the army emerged from the mountain trap still carrying captured French banners and prisoners of war, preserving their cohesion instead of facing total annihilation. This costly escape cemented the campaign's reputation. Karl von Clausewitz later studied the retreat, and Napoleon himself expressed admiration for the Russian feat. Veterans of the crossing, like Pyotr Bagration and Mikhail Miloradovich, would use these lessons to lead the next generation of Russian armies. Back in St. Petersburg, Tsar Paul I rewarded the aging commander, naming him Generalissimo and Prince of Italy. Suvorov survived his final triumph by only a few months. Today, his tomb in St. Petersburg bears no grand list of victories, but a simple, lasting epitaph. Here lies Suvorov. Here lies Suvorov. His simple epitaph leaves us with history's ultimate what-if. Could any other commander have dragged an army back from that frozen alpine abyss? His triumph remains proof that sheer human will can rewrite the laws of war. Subscribe for more legendary battles.